My mother is an ethnic German woman, born in Kazakhstan in the 49th, brought up at home before school, so she learned Russian only at school. Accordingly, German is practically fluent. Father was born and raised in Ukraine and one of the villages of Vinnytsia region. At 66, when he was 25, he volunteered to go to Kazakhstan to raise the Virgin Lands, where he met my mother. In September 69, they got married and immediately left for Ukraine. They wanted to arrange their life there. In the early days, they wanted to get married again according to the church rite, since in Kazakhstan there was no such opportunity. The village is small, everyone knows everything about each other, and during the evening home gatherings, my father's grandmother told my mother about their witch neighbor, who lived through 2 houses in the direction of the forest. They say that this witch harms both people and pets, and keeps fear the majority of the inhabitants of the farm. My mom is impressionable, scared, and Dad just chuckled, said that all this is nonsense. No one knew how old the old woman was. Her parents said that she looked 90, 100 years old, all wrinkled and tidy, but still moving quite vigorously. Where, when exactly, and how she appeared in the village, and whether she had relatives, maybe that's why rumors went that the witch. On what she lived, it was also incomprehensible. She did not have a garden as such, nor cattle either. In general, continuous speculation. There were rumors that she could commission a spoilage by order. She corroded unborn children. No one, of course, admitted, but the hospitals did not have abortions. Then, in principle, it is clear where the means of subsistence came from. In the days when my parents arrived, it was known that the old woman had been seriously ill for a couple of months and very rarely went outside. At such moments she got up at her fence and either silently, intently, with anger looked at those passing by, or cursed everyone on whom the light was standing, and tried to throw something. Over time, people passed through this, and when they saw it at the fence, they went to another street. The most interesting thing is that everyone who ever met her and could more or less examine her said that her teeth were extremely well preserved, almost like young ones, despite her age. On the wedding day, my mother went out early in the morning to pray in the garden. I read prayers in German, but said that it was very quiet, almost to myself. No one standing farther than half a meter could make out anything. And then he says, I open my eyes, and this old woman is standing in front of the fence in front of me and looks at me with such anger, and when she saw that I noticed her, how about let's yell at me and curse me? Among other things, she shouted, why did you come here, non-Russian rubbish? And how did you know? I stood. At first I couldn't figure anything out, and she put her hand in her pocket, pulled out something, threw a handful of earth at me and hobbled away. I have tears in my eyes from resentment, the earth in my hair is stuck. I ran to the hut, and there my grandmother just got up and wanted to put the dough. Well, I told her everything. And then the granny launched such a stormy activity. I woke everyone who was still asleep, told my mother to close in the hallway, and dress, put her clothes in a bag, put on a nightshirt to the toes and loose her hair. She ordered my father to flood the bathhouse and drowned in the church. Pretty quickly she returned with 3 candles, removed the old cross from the iconostasis, grabbed her mother and a bag of clothes, and into the bathhouse. For about 2 hours she was hovering, washing her head off, until 3 candles were burned, and burned a bag of clothes in a bathhouse in a furnace. The wedding was at noon, everything went well. In the evening we walked at home and went to bed. And at night Mom became ill, the temperature rose, a strange rash appeared, as if they had unfastened the nettles, only much brighter. She began to rave, trembling all over her body. Father said she looked so bad, they thought she would die. The nearest hospital is 30 kilometers away, no cause. I immediately called my great-grandmother. She made some tea from her stock, poured several mugs into her and read prayers over her all night. 1.5 to 2 hours after the onset of symptoms, everything went as suddenly as it started, and she fell asleep quite quickly. In the morning she felt fine and remembered almost nothing. On the same day, he and his father quarreled strongly, almost for life, but for death, and now both do not know why. It got to the point that my mother packed up her suitcase and went on foot to the station, returning to Kazakhstan. And here again the great-grandmother intervened, caught up with her on a cart, persuaded her to go with her at least temporarily, to her house. She said that it was spoiling, and she would try to remove it. For 4 days my mother lived with her. Granny did not let her out of the house. Every day she ran to the church for candles, almost continuously read prayers, now above her mother, now in front of the iconostasis. The most interesting thing, Mom says that she sifted flour over her head several times every day and then put dough out of it and baked bread. The first loaf did not rise at all, it was more like a flat cake. Grandma didn't touch her with her hands, she took it through a towel, carried out of the house and buried behind the garden. The second and third turned out much better, but still not as good as usual. Their great-grandmother fed the pigs. The fourth came to fame, airy, ruddy. She crushed her 2 pigeons and said that now everything is in order. Mom no longer had any anger at her father and that very evening ran away to him. Parents say that during family life they quarreled more than once, not without it, but like that day, they never cursed again. And great-grandmother 2 days later became very sick, lay there for almost 2 weeks. Already they thought they wouldn't go out, but then she left. Moreover, there were no specific symptoms, as such, just bad weakness. The paramedic made a helpless gesture, said that, most likely, a hypertensive crisis should be taken to the hospital, but the granny did not agree. On this, everything seemed to settle down. But a few weeks later it became known that that old woman was lying dead. They found out quite by accident. People passing by heard loud moans and inhuman howls from home. A crowd gathered in the evening. The chairman pounded on the door for a long time, and the old woman laughed in the house and did not open it. The door was hacked, but no one wanted to enter the house. The paramedic had to go himself. After a couple of minutes he went out and said that the old woman was terribly dehydrated, exhausted and lying in delirium. He has no opportunity to do something on the spot, and she won't survive the road to the hospital. Therefore, they decided to let her die calmly at home. They thought that she would not survive the night, but they made a big mistake. The next day, moans and curses in delirium did not stop. Someone was constantly at the door, but they didn't go inside, so the stove was not heated. Winter has not yet begun, but the weather was quite cold and damp, constantly drizzling rain. Surely the house was no more than 12-13 degrees. Someone said that a witch would not die until she gave her gift. They decided that if they didn't die by morning, then they would call the priest so that he would be repented. The chairman began to resent. They looked at him so frowningly that he immediately fell silent. The next morning, the old woman moaned further. The chairman began to resent. It was a rather young party atheist from somewhere in the region. They looked at him so frowningly, moreover, half of the village at once, that he immediately fell silent. The next morning, the old woman moaned further. The chairman began to resent. It was a rather young party atheist from somewhere in the region. They looked at him so frowningly, moreover, half of the village at once, that he immediately fell silent. The next morning, the old woman moaned further. They called a priest. We got up in the hallway almost opposite the bed, did not dare to enter the room. In addition to the priest, there were several old women who sang along with him and 4-5 men from the village who regularly changed, among them my father. Dad said that the sight was not pleasant. On a greasy mattress lay exhausted, skin and bones, a gray-haired old woman with such black and evil eyes that all those present tried not to catch her gaze. She lay uneasy, barely moving lips, plucked out from herself some word-sized curses, obviously related to those present. Attacks of impotence gave way to her aggression, black anger, in the gusts of which she tried to jump from her deathbed, but then again fell into impotence on the bed. By the end of the third day, the priest said that it was necessary to dismantle the roof over the bed so that her soul could finally move away. The chairman began to resent again, shouting that he would not allow property damage and would report everything to the district committee. The chairman was given in the face and locked in the stable. They said that still no one would believe that the whole village rebelled, and there were also party people, very respected in the district committee. 3 men climbed onto the roof and began to disassemble the roof and ceiling above the bed. By 11 p.m. everything was ready. Father said that when the rustles on the roof started, the old woman became quiet, no longer made a sound and did not take her eyes off the ceiling, and then from the hole. About an hour and a half after the roof was dismantled, the old woman died with a long sigh. Here, in my opinion, mysticism begins. My father helped to put the old woman in a coffin, and when he bent over her, he was shocked. In his mouth almost all his teeth were in place. As I mentioned, people said that her teeth were in very good condition. But it was almost completely rotten, black and yellow stumps, especially the front ones. They were broken off and more than half cut off. Father said that this picture remained for his whole life before his eyes. When he told his mother at home, she did not believe it, said or imagined or invents, but the great-grandmother confirmed. She also buried her there. If the teeth were really good, then they could not come to such a state in a few weeks. For the last 5-7 years, the old woman has definitely not left the village. There was no mention of a dentist there. For prostheses, your own teeth must be removed. And then there were no such prostheses. Really all imagined. They set the house on fire as soon as they brought out the coffin with the body. At least until the 87th year there was a wasteland overgrown with weeds. But that is not all. The grave was dug behind the cemetery wall. The cemetery is on a hill, and digging, it turns out, on a slope. When they removed about 1 meter of land, it turned out that a hole had been dug exactly above 2 granite boulders, converging deep into each other with a narrow crevice. Nobody wanted to dig a new grave, they just took out the clay between them as much as they could, and left it that way. That is, it turns out that there was a normal grave on top, and then its stone walls converged downward like a funnel. The coffin could only be lowered to the depth as far as the width of the grave allowed. There was still a void under the box. When the ropes were pulled out, what was to be expected happened. The coffin fell off, collapsed sideways to the bottom of the crevice, while a long crack formed in the upper side wall, about 3 cm wide. The priest said it was a bad sign, but nobody wanted to do anything else. So they covered it with earth, and put up a wooden cross to rest. In the spring, the graveyard watchman went around the territory, looked at the witch's grave. The cross rotted, almost fell apart, and this took several months. Put in you. The following summer, my parents returned to Kazakhstan. In Ukraine, unfortunately, it did not work out. They learned the end of history from letters. In the spring of next year, as in the spring of the third, the situation with the cross was repeated 1-to-1. The crosses were rotting and falling apart, as if they had been standing there for at least 10 years. Atheists said that this side of the hill was just too damp, and the believers that the witch could not calm down. Then, on the advice of the priest, they forged an iron cross with a very long lower end, which they sharpened. They consecrated it in the church and drove it into the grave until it fell into the ground, so that the sharp end passed through the body, overlaid with stones and filled with concrete. Since then nothing more has happened. My father said that when my grandmother was buried in the 87th, he came down with me behind the cemetery wall to look at the witch's grave. The cross was still sticking out of the bushes. But I don't remember it, it was too small.